They called the sheriff because I turned the water in my own lake green. Dead fish floated. A lake my family had owned for nearly 70 years. The lake, the shoreline, the old wooden bridge, every inch of water tucked beneath those Colorado mountains belonged to the Warren family long before Aspen Grove Estates ever existed. The HOA had spent nearly $2 million building luxury villas on floating platforms in the middle of Warren Lake. They sold weekend packages. They sold private decks. They sold lake views, dinner reservations, and exclusive access to wealthy residents who wanted to wake up surrounded by pine trees and mountain water. The only problem was simple. They never owned the lake. The HOA president, Madeline Pierce, stood on my father's bridge in a bright pink suit and matching heels, smiling like she had already won.
Maybe if you spent less time clinging to old family stories, Mr. Warren, you would understand that progress has already arrived.
You know what? You are absolutely right.
Then I went home and did something she never saw coming. Less than 24 hours later, Warren Lake looked poisoned. The clear blue water had turned a sick green. White foam drifted around the bridge. Dead fish floated near the docks. Guests who had paid thousands of dollars for a luxury lake experience stood on the shore holding their phones, recording a paradise that suddenly looked like a crime scene. But before I tell you what that cost Madeline in money, reputation, and ways she never imagined, tell me something. What would you do if you came home from your mother's funeral and found strangers had built private villas in the middle of your family's lake? And please help me reach my first 1,000 subscribers. It would mean so much to me right now. My name is Caleb Warren. I am 49 years old, a third-generation bridge contractor from western Colorado. I've spent 26 years building access roads, repairing old timber crossings, pouring foundations, and moving enough rock to make mountain towns feel connected to the rest of the world. I am 6 feet tall, broad through the shoulders, with short dark brown hair, a square jaw, rough hands, and the kind of face people usually call serious, even when I'm trying to be polite. Most days, I wear the same thing, a red and black plaid flannel shirt over a gray t-shirt, blue jeans, brown leather work boots, and a scratched steel wristwatch that belonged to my father. My wife left years ago when she decided a man tied to land and family history was not the kind of future she wanted. No children, no partner, just me, my tools, and the lake my parents spent their lives protecting. Warren Lake sat outside a small Colorado town called Pine Hollow. Most people drove through it without slowing down. One diner, one gas station, one sheriff's office, one church with a bell that had been cracked since the 80s. And beyond the North Road, one lake surrounded by pine forest, granite cliffs, and mountain peaks that turned orange every evening when the sun dropped behind the ridge. My father, Thomas Warren, built the wooden bridge across the shallow cove with his own crew in 1984. He was tall, lean, quiet, and stubborn enough to argue with a survey marker if he thought it had been moved. He taught me how to drive pilings, how to read water levels, how to spot a weak board before it broke under weight, and how to respect a property line even when nobody was watching. My mother, Evelyn Warren, loved the lake differently. She kept notebooks full of bird sightings, pressed wildflowers between recipe cards, and scolded anyone who left trash near the shore. She was 72 when her heart finally gave out. Small woman, silver hair, gentle voice, sharp eyes. People thought she was soft until they tried to push her around. Then they learned she had more steel in her spine than most men I had worked beside. 3 weeks after her funeral, I drove back to the old lake house. The cedar cabin sat on a rocky bluff above the water, exactly where it had always been. The porch sagged on the east corner. The chimney needed repair. The windows were dusty. I had planned to stay a few weeks, sort through my mother's things, fix what I could, and decide whether keeping the property still made sense. Then I rounded the last curve in the gravel road and nearly drove into a ditch. Warren Lake was not empty. It was not quiet. It was not private. In the middle of the water stood a row of brand-new luxury villas, each one made of dark timber, glass walls, stone columns, and wide decks that floated over the lake like they had grown there overnight. Small boats moved between the platforms. Workers in reflective vests carried furniture across my father's bridge. Landscapers planted decorative shrubs in large white planters near the shoreline. At the entrance to the bridge stood a polished sign, Emerald Point Lake Villas. I read it once, then again. My mother had never sold this lake. My father had never leased that bridge. I had never signed a single agreement allowing strangers to build anything in the water. I parked beside the gravel shoulder and stepped out slowly. That was when I first saw Madeline Pierce. Madeline was 44, tall and slim, with perfectly styled blonde hair cut just above her shoulders. She wore a bright pink business suit, white blouse, gold watch, and heels that had no business being on a wooden bridge. She had the polished smile of a woman used to being obeyed and the cold eyes of someone who mistook money for law. Behind her stood two men in golf shirts, both watching me like I was a maintenance problem. "Can I help you?" Madeline asked. I looked past her at the villas. "No," I said. "But you can explain why your people are building in my lake." Her smile barely moved. "Your lake?" "That is what I said." She gave a small laugh, the kind meant for an audience. "Mr. Warren, Aspen Grove Estates has invested significant resources into improving this neglected property. The community has moved forward." I looked at the bridge under her feet. That bridge was built by my father. And now it provides access to a community amenity. I stared at her for a long second. It provides access across private property. Her expression hardened. 10 minutes later, I had pulled a temporary private property sign from the back of my truck and wired it to the first bridge post. Madeline watched like I had slapped her in public. Then she pulled out her phone and called the sheriff. Sheriff Owen Keller arrived 20 minutes later in a dusty county patrol truck. Owen was 57, heavy-set but strong, with a gray mustache, tired blue eyes, and the slow walk of a man who had spent 3 decades separating facts from noise. He was not friendly. He was not rude. He was the kind of lawman who listened before deciding who had made the bigger mistake. Madeline spoke first, of course. "He is obstructing access to HOA property." Owen looked at me. "Mr. Warren?" I pointed toward the lake. "That water, that bridge, and the shoreline are Warren property. They built those villas without my permission." Owen looked across the bridge, then back at Madeline. "Do either of you have documents?" Madeline smiled again, but this time it took effort. "Our records are with the association attorney." I opened my truck door and pulled out the deed packet my mother had kept in the glove box of her old filing cabinet. Owen took it, studied the top page, and said nothing for a while. That silence bothered Madeline more than anything I had said. Finally, the sheriff handed the papers back to me. "Nobody is getting arrested today," he said, "but nobody makes this worse until I see the rest of the records." Madeline's smile vanished. As Owen walked back to his truck, I looked again at the villas in the middle of Warren Lake, then at the bridge my father had built, then at the expensive sign that did not belong there. That was when the thought first crossed my mind. For Madeline to be standing there that confidently, someone had given her a document. And if that document said my family agreed to this, then somebody had lied. I did not argue with Madeline Pierce after Sheriff Owen Keller left. That surprised her. People like Madeline expect anger because anger is easy to use against a man. They can point to it, name it, dress it up as instability and send it around in an email before supper. So I did the one thing she did not want me to do. I got quiet. The old lake house smelled the way it always had after being closed too long. Dust, cedar, cold stone from the fireplace, and a little bit of my mother's lavender soap still clinging to the bathroom cabinet. I stood in the front room for several minutes looking at the boxes stacked against the wall, the old photographs on the mantel, the fishing rods my father had never thrown away. Outside the window, Emerald Point Lake villas glowed in the afternoon sun like they had every right to be there. That bothered me more than the size of the buildings. Confidence is one thing when a person is right. It is another thing entirely when someone is standing on stolen ground and smiling about it. My mother kept records the way other people kept family recipes. Every deed, tax bill, insurance notice, survey copy, bridge inspection, and water permit had its own folder. Evelyn Warren had been small enough to disappear behind a stack of laundry, but she could terrify a banker with one eyebrow and a paper trail. After my father died, she became even more careful. Grief made her quieter, but it also made her protective in a way I understood only after she was gone. I started in her desk. The top drawer held stamps, church envelopes, old birthday cards, and 3 pairs of reading glasses because she always lost one pair and bought another. The second drawer held county tax records going back 20 years. The bottom drawer was locked. I found the key taped beneath the pencil tray. Inside were 4 thick folders labeled in my mother's neat handwriting. Warren Lake deed, shoreline easement denials, bridge ownership, lake bottom survey. I sat down slowly. The first folder confirmed what I already knew. Warren Lake, the shoreline, and the surrounding access road belonged to the Warren Family Trust. The second folder showed something more interesting. Over the years, developers had approached my parents at least 6 times, asking for access, leasing rights, or recreational easements. My parents had refused every one of them. The third folder made my jaw tighten. The wooden bridge was not county property. It was not public property. It was not shared access. It had been built by Thomas Warren Construction in 1984, inspected privately, maintained privately, and recorded as a private bridge serving Warren land. My father had not just built that bridge. He had protected it. By evening, my younger sister, Rachel Warren, called from Grand Junction. Rachel was 42, a 5th-grade teacher with dark hair usually tied into a practical bun, soft brown eyes, and the tired patience of someone who spent her days explaining fractions to children and manners to their parents. She had my mother's kindness and my father's habit of going silent when she was worried. "You saw the villas?" she asked. "I saw them." There was a pause. "Caleb, I know what you're thinking." "No, you don't." "I know enough. Aspen Grove has money. They have attorneys. They have people who make problems disappear with paperwork." I looked down at the bridge folder on the table. That is exactly what I'm afraid of. Rachel exhaled slowly. "Mom would not want you to lose everything fighting them." "No," I said. "She would want me to find out who signed her name." The silence that followed was different. "What do you mean?" Rachel asked. "I do not know yet, but I had a feeling." The next morning, I drove into Pine Hollow and stopped at the county records office, a low brick building beside the courthouse with cracked steps and a flagpole that leaned slightly to the left. Inside, the air smelled like old paper, floor polish, and coffee that had been sitting too long. The woman behind the counter was young enough not to recognize me. Her name tag said, Alicia Grant. She was maybe 27, with curly black hair, round glasses, and the nervous smile of someone new to government work and already disappointed by it. "I need all filings connected to Warren Lake Aspen Grove Estates and Emerald Point Lake Villas, I said. Her smile faded a little. That may take some time. I have time. She disappeared into the back. 20 minutes later, another woman stepped through the archive door carrying a cardboard file box against her hip. Nora Whitaker was 70 years old, tall and narrow, with silver hair twisted into a loose knot and a pair of reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain. She had retired from county records 5 years earlier, but retirement had not taken the county records out of her. Nora had known my father, which meant she looked at me like she was seeing both of us at once. "Caleb Warren," she said. "I wondered when you would come in." That was not a greeting. That was a warning. Nora led me to a side table beneath a flickering fluorescent light. She opened the box and pulled out a stamped file labeled Lake Access Agreement. My stomach went cold. The document claimed Evelyn Warren had granted Aspen Grove Estates limited access to Warren Lake, including use of the bridge, shoreline maintenance zones, and construction staging areas connected to Emerald Point. At the bottom was my mother's signature. Only it was wrong. Not badly wrong, that would have been easier. It was close enough to fool someone who had never watched her sign birthday cards for 40 years. But the E was too sharp. The W leaned too far right. The line trembled in a way my mother's hand never had before the surgery. I looked at the date. Then everything inside me went still. "That was the week she was in St. Mary's," I said. Nora nodded. My mother had undergone heart surgery that Monday. For 6 days afterward, she could barely hold a cup of water. Rachel and I had taken turns sitting beside her bed while nurses adjusted tubes and machines. She had not signed a lake access agreement. She had not signed anything. Nora lowered her voice. "Your father came in before he died asking about recent filings near the lake. He was angry, but he was also tired. After your mother's surgery, things started moving quickly. Permit requests, site revisions, access notations, all very clean on paper." "Clean does not mean true." "No," Nora said. "It usually means someone knew where to wipe." By the time I left the records office, my phone had 11 new messages. 3 from unknown numbers, 2 from Rachel, 1 from Sheriff Keller. The rest were forwarded emails from people I did not know inside Aspen Grove Estates. Madeline had sent a notice to the entire community. Subject line, "Urgent update regarding threat to Emerald Point Lake Villas." According to Madeline, I was a bitter heir attempting to obstruct progress, damage property values, and interfere with a fully approved community improvement. She wrote that the grand opening would continue as scheduled, with private tours, investor previews, and resident access beginning that weekend. I read the email twice in my truck. Then I looked through the windshield toward the mountains above Warren Lake. Madeline thought she had a signed agreement, a luxury project, a bridge, and a crowd of wealthy residents behind her. I had my mother's medical records, my father's bridge documents, county maps, and a signature that should never have existed. For the first time since I had seen those villas, I understood the size of the lie. And I knew the bridge was only the beginning. The thing about a lie built on water is that sooner or later something underneath starts moving. By the next morning, Madeline Pierce's email had already done what she wanted it to do. My phone kept buzzing with messages from numbers I did not recognize. Some called me selfish, some called me unstable. One man told me I should be grateful Aspen Grove had turned my forgotten swamp into something valuable. Forgotten swamp. That was what they called the lake my mother had watched over with binoculars and bird notebooks. The lake my father had worked around for half his life. The lake where my sister and I learned how cold mountain water could steal your breath and still make you laugh. I did not answer any of them. I spent the morning walking the shoreline instead. Emerald Point Lake villas looked different when you studied them from the trees. Not beautiful, not permanent, just expensive. Power lines had been run through temporary conduits along the bridge. Water hoses crossed the decking. Construction netting hung under two of the floating platforms. Near the far side of the cove, I saw disturbed silt below the surface, a pale brown cloud trapped beneath the reflection of glass walls and designer balconies. My father would have noticed that first. Thomas Warren used to say, "Water remembered everything." Every careless cut into a bank, every loose barrel, every bad drain, every shortcut taken by a man who thought nobody would check below the surface. So I checked. Behind the old equipment shed, half buried under pine needles and years of neglect, was a rusted steel hatch I had not opened since I was 23. The shed itself leaned slightly to the east, with gray boards, a sagging roof, and one cracked window my father had always meant to fix. Inside were old tools, bridge clamps, coiled rope, faded survey flags, and the smell of machine oil that made me feel 12 years old again. Under the hatch was the old lake maintenance control system. Nothing dramatic, no secret weapon, no illegal pipe, just a permitted mud release and circulation assembly my father had installed decades ago to clean shallow sections of the cove after spring runoff. It moved bottom sediment, pushed old organic buildup away from the bridge pilings, and kept the water from choking itself when algae gathered in the warmer months. The county knew about it. The state knew about it. My father had inspected it every few years and kept every permit in a folder my mother had labeled in blue ink. That folder was now sitting on the passenger seat of my truck. I stood over the hatch for a long time. There are moments in a man's life when doing nothing feels safer, cleaner, easier. Walk away. Call lawyers. Wait 6 months. Let rich people argue in air-conditioned rooms while your family's name gets dragged through emails and clubhouse gossip. But then I looked across the lake and saw workers carrying white patio furniture into a villa built over my lake bed. That settled it. I drove into town and stopped at Pine Hollow Supply, a narrow hardware store with wooden floors and a bell above the door. The owner, Dale Morrow, was 63, round-faced, bald on top, and friendly in the careful way of a man who had sold tools to both sides of every local argument for 40 years. He wore suspenders over a denim shirt and had sawdust on one sleeve. "You look like your father when he was about to fix something angry," Dale said. "I need pond dye," I told him. "Biological grade, non-toxic, the kind ranchers use for algae control and water visibility." His eyebrows lifted. "That for Warren Lake?" "That is my lake." He did not ask another question. I bought what I needed, kept the receipts, and read every warning label twice. Then I drove to the house and set my phone on a tripod beside the shed. I recorded the permits. I recorded the product labels. I recorded the unopened containers. I recorded myself saying the date, the time, and exactly what I was doing. People with nothing to hide document things. People like Madeline write emails. By late afternoon, I opened the control system just enough to wake the old cove. At first, nothing happened. Then the water near the bridge began to move in a slow circle. Brown sediment lifted from the bottom. Old weeds rolled upward. Pollen, algae film, and trapped construction debris drifted into the current. When the dye spread, it did not look blue the way it did in ranch ponds. Mixed with the disturbed muck and rotting plant matter, it turned the cove a thick, ugly green. Not poison, but it sure looked like it. White scum gathered near the floating decks. A sour mud smell rose from the shallow water. Near the construction pilings, several dead fish surfaced, silver bellies flashing in the afternoon light. They were not fresh. I could tell by the eyes and the way the bodies floated heavy and soft. They had been trapped somewhere under the work platforms, hidden until the water began moving. That part I had not expected. I filmed that too. About 30 minutes later, a white work truck stopped near the service path. A man climbed out and stared at the lake like he had seen a ghost. He was in his early 30s, lean, sunburned, with sandy hair shoved under a dirty baseball cap and a yellow safety vest hanging open over a black t-shirt. His jeans were streaked with concrete dust. His boots looked like they had spent the year losing fights with mud. I recognized him from the villa site. Tyler Briggs. He had the nervous energy of a man who had learned to keep his mouth shut around people who signed checks. But standing there, looking at the green water and the dead fish, Tyler forgot to pretend. "Oh no," he muttered. I looked at him. "Something wrong?" His eyes moved from the cove to the villas, then back to me. "What did you put in there?" "Nothing toxic." He swallowed. "You better hope that is true." That was an interesting thing to say. Tyler took one step closer, then stopped himself. His face had gone pale under the sunburn. "They are going to blame you for all of it," he said. "All of what?" He looked toward the villa platforms, where the water had turned the color of old paint. For a second I thought he might answer. Then his phone rang. Tyler glanced at the screen, cursed under his breath, and backed toward his truck. "I was never here." He drove away fast, gravel kicking behind his tires. I stood beside the bridge until the sun dropped behind the ridge and the villas reflected in water that no longer looked expensive. Madeline wanted to sell Paradise. By morning, Paradise would look contaminated. And somewhere out there, Tyler Briggs knew more than he had meant to say. By sunrise, Warren Lake looked like something that should have been behind yellow tape. The water around Emerald Point Lake Villas had turned a thick, dirty green. Not the clean blue-green color people put on brochures, but the kind of green that made a person step back from the shoreline without thinking. White foam gathered in slow rings around the bridge pilings. Brown weeds floated against the docks. Near the first floating platform, 3 dead fish drifted belly up beside a row of polished deck chairs that still had their plastic covers on. It was ugly. That was the point. I stood on the bluff above the lake with a cup of coffee in my hand and watched Aspen Grove Estates discover the difference between owning a dream and owning the land beneath it. By 8 o'clock, the first catering truck arrived, then another. A florist van came next, followed by 2 black SUVs, a real estate shuttle, and a white Mercedes convertible driven by a man wearing sunglasses large enough to cover half his face. They all slowed at the bridge. Then they saw the water. Nobody got out right away. People always need a few seconds to understand that the thing they were promised is not the thing in front of them. Madeline Pierce arrived at 8:30 in a pearl white Lexus. She stepped out wearing a bright pink suit, white blouse, gold necklace, and matching heels, looking exactly like a woman who had planned to be photographed from the best angle. Her blonde hair had been styled into soft waves, her makeup was perfect, and her smile lasted just long enough for her to smell the mud coming off the cove. Then she saw the fish. Her face changed before she could stop it. Beside her was Grant Holloway, the Aspen Grove marketing director. Grant was 38, narrow-shouldered, clean-shaven, with dark gelled hair and the anxious energy of a man whose entire career depended on pretending disasters were opportunities. He carried a tablet under one arm and wore a navy blazer over a white shirt with no tie, the uniform of someone who wanted to look relaxed while panicking privately. "Madeline," he said quietly, "we may need to delay guest entry." Madeline did not even look at him. "No," she said, "we are not delaying anything." That was Madeline's gift. When reality became inconvenient, she gave orders to it. By 9 o'clock, the shoreline was full. Wealthy residents in linen shirts and designer sunglasses stood near the bridge holding paper coffee cups and whispering. Real estate agents arrived with glossy folders they suddenly did not want to hand out. A few investors stood near the welcome table, staring at the green water like they were calculating losses in real time. One of them was Miles Carter, 46 years old, tall, athletic, with silver at his temples and a navy polo shirt tucked into expensive khaki pants. Miles owned a chain of fitness clubs in Denver and had the confident posture of a man used to people returning his calls. He had already placed a deposit on one of the lake villas. I knew that because he said it loudly enough for half the shoreline to hear. "I paid for mountain water views," he snapped, "not a toxic pond." A woman beside him started filming, then more phones came out. That was when Madeline finally spotted me standing near the gravel turnout. She walked toward me fast, heels striking the bridge boards hard enough to make two workers move aside. Her smile was gone now. So was the polished voice. "You did this," she said. I looked toward the villas. "Good morning to you, too." Her eyes flashed. "Do not play games with me, Mr. Warren. You poisoned community property." There it was again. Community property. A phrase repeated enough times can start to sound like truth to people who do not check documents. "I did not poison anything," I said. She pointed toward the dead fish. "Look at it." I am looking. By then, the crowd had shifted closer. Residents, investors, agents, catering staff, and a young local reporter named Leah Brooks. Leah was 29, short, sharp-eyed, with curly red hair pulled back in a clip and a camera hanging from her neck. She worked for the Pine Hollow Gazette, a weekly paper most people ignored until their name appeared in it. She had the quiet patience of someone who knew people revealed more when they thought she was harmless. Madeline noticed the camera and changed her tone immediately. "This man is attempting to sabotage a lawful community project," she announced. "Aspen Grove Estates will pursue every available remedy." I almost admired the speed of it. Less than 10 seconds from panic to performance. Sheriff Owen Keller arrived just before 10. His patrol truck rolled down the gravel road slowly, as if the vehicle itself was tired of HOA emergencies. Owen stepped out in his tan uniform, gray mustache set above a hard mouth, blue eyes moving from the water to the crowd, to Madeline, to me. Deputy Alicia Grant climbed out after him. She was in her early 30s, medium height, dark hair tucked under her sheriff's cap, with a composed face that suggested she had learned not to react too quickly around angry adults. She carried a notepad and watched the phones in the crowd before she watched the people holding them. Madeline marched straight to Owen. "Arrest him." Owen looked at the lake. "For what?" "For environmental vandalism, for destruction of HOA property, for interfering with a permitted development." I opened the folder I had brought and handed it to him. "This is the deed," I said. "This is the bridge ownership record. This is the lake bottom survey. These are permits for the old mud release and circulation system. These are receipts for biological grade pond dye. And this is video of everything I did yesterday." Owen took the folder without speaking. Madeline laughed once, sharp and ugly. "You admit it?" I turned so the crowd could hear me. "Yes," I said. "I made the water change color." The shoreline went quiet. Even the people filming seemed to lower their phones a little. "I used a non-toxic dye and an old permitted maintenance system owned by my family," I said. "I recorded the entire process because I knew someone would lie about it." Madeline stepped forward. "He confessed." "No," Owen said, still reading. "He explained." That did not help her mood. Miles Carter stepped closer, pointing toward the villas. "Then who is paying us back? I gave your office a deposit, Madeline. You told me access was secured." Several others joined in. A woman demanded her reservation fee. A realtor asked whether tours were canceled. Grant Holloway stared at his tablet like it might offer a door to another life. Then a truck door slammed near the service road. Tyler Briggs walked toward the crowd. He looked worse than the day before. Same sandy hair under a dirty cap, same sunburned face, same construction boots. But now his eyes were red, and his hands would not stay still. A man like Tyler did not enjoy attention. He looked like attention had dragged him there by the collar. Madeline saw him and froze. That told me plenty. Tyler stopped beside Sheriff Keller and pulled a folded envelope from his vest pocket. "I need to say something," he said. Owen studied him. "About what?" Tyler looked at the green water, then at Madeline. "About the chemicals," he said, "and the invoices they told us not to file." Madeline's voice cut across the shoreline. "Tyler, you do not have authorization to discuss contractor records." Tyler did not look at her. For the first time since I met him, he looked at the sheriff. "They knew there was a problem before yesterday," he said. "They hid it." And just like that, the grand opening ended. By noon, the grand opening was no longer a grand opening. It had become an investigation. The catering tables were still standing near the bridge, covered with white cloths and untouched trays of fruit, cheese, and tiny sandwiches nobody wanted anymore. The welcome banner for Emerald Point Lake Villas hung crooked between two posts, flapping above water that looked like something leaking from a factory drain. People who had arrived expecting champagne tours were now standing in clusters, whispering into phones and staring at Madeline Pierce like she had sold them front-row seats to a disaster. Sheriff Owen Keller did not let anyone cross the bridge after Tyler Briggs handed him the envelope. That bothered Madeline more than the green water. "You cannot shut down access based on one disgruntled contractor," she said. Owen looked at her the way a tired man looks at a stove someone swears is not on fire while smoke fills the room. "I am not shutting it down based on Tyler. I am keeping people out until the state looks at the water." "The state?" she asked. That was the first time I saw real fear touch her face. The Colorado Department of Environmental Quality arrived 2 hours later. The first truck belonged to Dr. Emily Hart, a freshwater environmental specialist from Durango. Emily was 39, athletic, and sunburned, with dark brown hair pulled into a tight ponytail and mud already dried along the cuffs of her field pants. She wore no makeup, no jewelry except a plain silver wedding band, and had the direct, unsmiling manner of a woman who trusted test results more than people. Behind her came Marcus Reed, a field technician in his late 20s, tall and thin with copper skin, close-cropped black hair, and a quiet seriousness that made him seem older than he was. He carried sample bottles, gloves, and a portable testing kit with the care of someone carrying evidence. Emily introduced herself to Owen, then turned to me. "You are Caleb Warren?" "Yes." "You are the one who altered the watercolor." "I am." Madeline folded her arms, waiting for that sentence to destroy me. It did not. Emily looked at me the same way she looked at the water, not angry, not friendly, measuring. "I will need your product labels, receipts, video, and any permits connected to the system you used." I handed her a folder before she finished the sentence. She glanced at it, then looked back at me. "You expected this?" "I expected her," I said, nodding toward Madeline. For the next 3 hours, Warren Lake became a scene of slow, careful truth. Marcus took samples from the shallow cove, the bridge pilings, the villa platforms, and the far water beyond the construction zone. Emily photographed the dead fish, the foam, the floating weeds, and the temporary pipes running under the first 2 villas. Deputy Alicia Grant logged names of every contractor still on site. Sheriff Keller kept residents behind the marked line. Madeline stayed close enough to look involved and far enough away to avoid questions. That changed when Tyler Briggs spoke again. Tyler sat on the open tailgate of his truck, elbows on his knees, staring at his boots. He looked smaller than he had that morning. Fear does that to a man when he has carried it too long. Owen stood in front of him with Alicia beside him, taking notes. Tyler's envelope held printed invoices, delivery photos, and screenshots of messages from a private contractor group chat. The name appearing over and over was Clear Blue Aquatic Services. According to Tyler, The HOA had hired them quietly after the first villa tour turned ugly because the cove water looked brown around the work platforms. They wanted it blue for buyers, Tyler said. Madeline said nobody would pay luxury prices to look at mountain mud. He handed Alicia his phone. The messages were not dramatic. That made them worse. No villain speech, no confession written in big, bold letters. Just short instructions, hidden deliveries, requests to keep chemical drums out of guest photos, and one message from Grant Holloway telling workers to make the water camera ready before Saturday. Grant, the marketing director, stood 20 feet away when Alicia read that one. His face went white. By late afternoon, Emily gave Sheriff Keller her first verbal assessment. She did not do it near Madeline. She did it near me, Owen, Alicia, Tyler, and 3 residents who refused to leave. The dye Mr. Warren used appears consistent with non-toxic biological pond dye, Emily said. Combined with sediment disruption, it created the visible green color. It is unpleasant, but based on initial field tests, it is not the primary environmental concern. Madeline heard enough to step closer. So he is responsible for the appearance. Emily turned to her. Appearance, yes, but not necessarily the contamination. The word landed hard. Contamination. Miles Carter, the investor who had demanded his money back, stared at Madeline. What contamination? Emily pointed toward the underside of the nearest villa platform. We found residue around an unregistered treatment line. We also found chemical traces inconsistent with Mr. Warren's dye. Madeline's mouth opened. Nothing useful came out. While the state worked at the lake, Rachel Warren started her own kind of pressure in town. She arrived near sunset in an old blue Subaru with a cracked windshield and a stack of printed letters on the passenger seat. Rachel looked exhausted, her teacher's cardigan buttoned wrong, her dark hair falling loose from its bun. But there was a fire in her face I had not seen since we were kids. With her was Sarah Miller, 35, a mother of 2, and president of the Pine Hollow Parent Council. Sarah was short, strong-built, with auburn hair, freckles, and the fierce expression of a woman who could calm a crying child and terrify a school board in the same afternoon. She had brought 6 parents with her. Rachel had organized them after learning that Aspen Grove had promised local schools a nature education partnership at Warren Lake, the same lake now sitting under a luxury development and possible chemical investigation. Sarah looked at the green water and shook her head. They were going to bring 4th graders here. That sentence did more damage than any accusation I could have made. At 5:30, Nora Whitaker arrived from the county records office carrying a yellow folder against her chest like it weighed more than paper. Her silver hair had come loose in the wind, and, for once, she looked angry instead of careful. I found the minutes, she told Owen. The folder contained old county meeting notes from 12 years earlier. My father, Thomas Warren, had formally rejected commercial development on Warren Lake. Not once. Twice. He had stated clearly that the lake was private conservation land and that the bridge would never be used for resort access. Owen read the pages slowly. Then he compared them to the lake access agreement bearing my mother's signature. His face hardened. I am sending this for document review, he said. But based on the medical timeline and these prior records, there is reason to believe this agreement may have been fraudulently filed. Madeline stopped pretending. You are making a mistake, she said. Owen looked at her. Maybe, but it will be a documented mistake. Around us, the residents finally began to understand. They had not bought access to a dream. They had bought into a lie built over someone else's lake, carried across someone else's bridge, and polished with chemicals someone had hoped would stay hidden under pretty water. By the time the sun dropped behind the ridge, nobody was asking why I had turned the lake green. They were asking what Madeline had been hiding before I did. The first thing Madeline Pierce lost was not her position. It was the room. 2 weeks after the failed grand opening, Aspen Grove Estates held an emergency meeting inside its clubhouse, a stone and glass building with vaulted ceilings, leather chairs, and windows facing the lake they no longer wanted to look at. I was not there. Sheriff Owen Keller told me later that Madeline arrived in another pink suit, stood behind the board table, and tried to smile at people who had stopped believing smiles. Nobody applauded. That was how power ended sometimes. Not with shouting, not with handcuffs. Just silence from people who used to clap. The environmental report came first. Dr. Emily Hart's team confirmed what she had suspected at the lake. The dye I used was non-toxic and temporary. Ugly, yes. Dramatic, absolutely. But not poisonous. The real problem came from an unregistered treatment line beneath the villa platforms and chemical residue linked to Clear Blue Aquatic Services. Those chemicals had been used without proper disclosure, without proper permits, and without anyone asking the Warren family, because asking would have meant admitting whose lake it was. Then came the document review. The lake access agreement bearing my mother's signature was sent to a handwriting specialist in Denver named Martin Kessler. Martin was in his early 60s, thin, pale, and precise, with silver wire glasses and the personality of a man who preferred ink to people. His report was not emotional. It did not need to be. The signature was inconsistent with my mother's verified handwriting, and the date matched the week she had been recovering from heart surgery at St. Mary's. That was enough. Madeline resigned before the month ended. Her resignation letter was short. Her investigation file was not. Aspen Grove Estates tried to distance itself from her immediately, the way people step away from a burning barrel after standing around it for warmth. Grant Holloway, the marketing director, claimed he had only followed instructions. 2 board members said they had relied on Madeline's legal assurances. Clear Blue Aquatic Services blamed a subcontractor. The subcontractor blamed communication caps, which is what guilty people call instructions once lawyers arrive. But the money trail was harder to rename. The HOA had sold villa access, private deck packages, and lake amenity memberships for property it did not own. Several buyers filed claims. Miles Carter, the investor who had once yelled about his view, became the loudest voice demanding refunds. He was still polished, still confident, still dressed like a man who measured time in meetings, but embarrassment had softened him in a way money never had. "I was wrong about you," he told me one afternoon near the locked bridge. "I noticed." He gave a tired laugh. "Fair enough." The settlement took months. The HOA agreed to compensate buyers, remove most of the illegal villa structures, restore the shoreline, pay environmental penalties, and return full control of the bridge to the Warren family. Nobody called it a victory at first. Victories are loud. This felt more like cleanup after a storm everybody had helped invite. I also had to answer for what I did. Not legally, in the end. Sheriff Keller, the county attorney, and the environmental agency all agreed I had used a permitted family system with a non-toxic product on my own property, and I had documented every step. There would be no criminal charge. But that did not mean everyone forgave me. Some residents said I had humiliated them. Some said I had scared their children. Some said the dead fish on the water would never leave their minds, even after Dr. Hart confirmed most had been trapped from earlier construction damage. Rachel said very little during that time, which meant more than yelling would have. One evening, she stood with me on the bluff while workers dismantled the outer villa decks. Rachel Warren looked smaller in the wind, her cardigan wrapped tight around her shoulders, dark hair coming loose around her face. She had spent weeks organizing parents, school records, and community meetings, but with me, she was still my little sister. "Mom would have hated seeing the lake like that," she said. "I know. She would have understood why you were angry. That is not the same thing." Rachel looked at me then, not judging, just honest. "No," she said, "it is not." That stayed with me. I had protected the lake, but I had also used it as a weapon. Maybe a legal one, maybe a clever one, maybe the only thing that made people look. But my mother had not protected Warren Lake so her son could turn it into a warning sign. My father had not built that bridge so it could become the center of a war. That was why I said yes when Dr. Emily Hart proposed keeping one of the safer structures. The largest central villa had been built on reinforced pilings that could be separated from the illegal private decks and converted. Emily wanted a small public education space, not a resort, not a clubhouse, not a rich person's toy. A place where students could learn about water quality, fish habitats, land records, and why property lines mattered. At first, I hated the idea. Then Rachel brought her students to the shoreline for a cleanup day. 20 children walked along Warren Lake carrying buckets and gloves, their faces serious in the way children get when adults finally trust them with something real. One boy found a rusted nail. One girl asked whether fish could remember bad water. Rachel answered carefully, then looked at me. I knew then. 6 months later, the last luxury sign came down. Emerald Point Lake Villas disappeared. In its place, a simple wooden sign went up beside the repaired bridge. Warren Lake Nature Center. Tyler Briggs joined the restoration crew full-time. He was still nervous around officials, still quiet when reporters asked questions, but he worked hard and kept every receipt like a man who had learned what paper could do. Nora Whitaker became the volunteer records keeper, sitting twice a week in a small office with old maps, bridge files, and my mother's notebooks. She hated being called important, which made people do it more. The water cleared slowly, not overnight. Real healing rarely does. Dr. Hart's team monitored the fish. Native vegetation was replanted along the cove. The bridge boards were replaced one by one, and this time, every bolt, permit, and inspection carried the Warren name where it belonged. On opening day, Rachel brought her class back. Sarah Miller and the parent council set up folding tables. Miles Carter arrived carrying donated fishing rods for the children. Sheriff Keller parked near the gravel turnout, leaned against his patrol truck, and watched the crowd with that tired half-smile of his. I stood on the bridge my father built and looked out over the lake my mother loved. The water was blue again. Children moved across the observation deck where wealthy guests had once expected champagne. Tyler helped a boy lower a test strip into the water. Nora showed 2 girls the old survey map. Rachel pointed toward the reeds where birds had started nesting again. For the first time in a long time, the bridge did not feel like a boundary. It felt like a promise. Madeline Pierce had tried to turn Warren Lake into a private playground for people who thought money could buy permission after the fact. She lost her title, her reputation, and the lies she had built across my family's water. But the lake survived. And in the end, that mattered more than watching her fall. Because Warren Lake was never meant to belong to the loudest person in the room. It belonged to the truth, to the land, to the people willing to protect it, and to a family that had finally brought it home. You know what gets me most about Caleb Warren's story? It wasn't just the green water, the dead fish, or the luxury villas sitting in the middle of a lake they never owned. It was the moment Caleb realized this fight was not about revenge. It was about his mother's forged signature, his father's bridge, and a truth powerful people tried to bury. Caleb stood firm when everyone blamed him. Because he did, the fake agreement was exposed. Tyler found courage. Nora brought the records forward, and Warren Lake was finally returned to what it was meant to be. Tonight, I pray God blesses your home, protects your family, and gives you courage when someone tries to take what is rightfully yours. If Caleb's story touched your heart, write Amen in the comments. And if you believe truth still matters, subscribe and stay with us. But Caleb's story was not the last time an ordinary man had to fight a powerful HOA. Wait until I tell you about the retired firefighter who came home to find the HOA had turned his hayfield into their private golf course. That story involves a stolen land survey, a charity tournament, a red tractor waiting at sunrise, and a board president who laughed right up until the first fairway disappeared under fresh-cut soil. And trust me, when the crowd realized whose land they had been playing on, even the sheriff had to step back and let the truth do the talking. Subscribe to the channel now, because this next story is one you definitely do not want to miss.